The exact moment I decided to end Michelle's career happened at 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday during our quarterly strategy review, when she looked directly at the CEO, smiled with practiced sympathy, and said, "Too bad none of Claire's ideas actually made it into the final plan. But I'm sure she tried her best." The conference room went quiet. That particular kind of quiet where everyone's suddenly very interested in their laptops because they know they're witnessing something uncomfortable but don't want to get involved. Marcus Livingston, our CEO, laughed. Actually laughed. Maybe Claire's keeping all her good ideas secret. Holding out on us. Michelle joined in. "Oh, you know Claire. Always so careful." I sat there, 3 seats down from Marcus, watching my executive assistant, the person I'd hired and mentored for 2 years, systematically undermine me in front of the entire leadership team. And I smiled. Because what Marcus and Michelle didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything for 6 months. Every stolen idea. Every undermining comment. Every meeting she'd deliberately scheduled wrong. Every email she'd altered before sending. Every conversation she'd had with other executives, positioning herself as the real brains behind my work. And I had proof. Comprehensive, time-stamped, legally sound proof. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and explain how I ended up in a conference room watching my own assistant mock me to my boss while I planned her professional destruction. My name is Claire Donovan. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Meridian Dynamics, a management consulting firm with 400 employees and $70 million in annual revenue. I've held this role for 4 years. Before that, I spent 8 years climbing from analyst to director to VP to finally landing the C-suite position I'd worked my entire career to achieve. When I made CSO, I needed an executive assistant. Someone smart, organized, and capable of managing the absolute chaos that is strategic planning at a consulting firm. Someone who could handle confidential information, coordinate with other executives, and represent me professionally when I couldn't be everywhere at once. Michelle Carter seemed perfect. Stanford MBA. 3 years at McKinsey. Articulate, polished, ambitious. During her interview, she said all the right things about wanting to learn from senior leadership before pursuing her own executive track. I should have caught the warning sign in that sentence. Before pursuing her own executive track. She wasn't looking for a career as an executive assistant. She was looking for a shortcut to my job. The first year was fine. Michelle was competent, detail-oriented, and professional. She managed my calendar flawlessly. Prepared briefing materials that were thorough and well-organized. Handled client communications with appropriate polish. I gave her increasing responsibility. Let her sit in on strategy sessions. Involved her in planning processes. Even credited her publicly when she contributed good ideas. I thought I was being a good mentor. Helping someone talented develop their career. I was actually training my replacement. Or at least, that's what Michelle thought. The problem started subtly. Small things I initially dismissed as miscommunications or honest mistakes. A client meeting rescheduled without my knowledge, causing me to miss it entirely. Michelle apologized profusely. "The client asked to move it and I thought I'd confirmed with you, but it must have slipped through. I'm so sorry." A strategy memo I'd drafted that somehow got sent to the executive team with several of my key recommendations removed and replaced with different suggestions. Michelle explained she'd thought I wanted her to incorporate feedback from our last discussion. I was trying to be proactive. Should I have waited for your approval? A presentation to the board where half my slides were in the wrong order. Michelle looked mortified. I don't know what happened. I triple-checked the file last night. Individually, these incidents were annoying but explainable. Cumulatively, they formed a pattern. But I didn't see the pattern yet. I just saw a capable assistant making occasional errors. The shift became obvious about 8 months ago during a leadership offsite. We were discussing long-term strategy. I presented a framework I'd been developing for months, a new approach to client engagement that would differentiate Meridian from competitors. Marcus seemed interested but non-committal. Said he wanted to think about it. Asked the team for input. Michelle, who was there taking notes, spoke up. I actually think there's a simpler version of this approach that might be more practical. And then she proceeded to present my framework. With slight modifications. Using different language. But fundamentally, she was presenting my work as her own insight. I stared at her. She didn't even glance my direction. Just spoke confidently to Marcus like she developed this thinking independently. Marcus loved it. Michelle, that's excellent. Why don't you work with Claire to develop this further? Work with me. To develop my own framework. That she'd just repackaged. After the meeting, I pulled her aside. Kept my voice professional. Michelle, that framework you presented. That was based on the work I shared with you last month. She blinked, innocent as snow. Was it? I'm sorry, Claire. I've been thinking about client engagement models for a while. Maybe we developed similar ideas independently. Great minds think alike, right? Michelle, you literally used 3 phrases I coined in my draft memo. Did I? I must have internalized your language from working together so closely. I didn't mean to blur the lines. I'll be more careful about attribution. She said it with such practiced sincerity that for a moment I questioned my own memory. But I knew what had happened. She'd stolen my work. And she'd done it smoothly enough that confronting her further would make me look petty or paranoid. That's when I started paying attention. Really paying attention. And once I started looking, I saw everything. Michelle had been systematically positioning herself as the strategic thinker behind my role. She'd been having casual conversations with other executives where she'd share insights that were actually summaries of my confidential strategy documents. She'd been volunteering for high-visibility projects and then quietly taking credit for work I'd done. But more than that, she'd been undermining me. Subtly. Carefully. She'd mentioned to Marcus's assistant that I seemed overwhelmed lately. She'd expressed concern to the CFO that I was struggling with the complexity of our growth phase. She'd tell other department heads that she was helping Claire manage her workload because I was stretched thin. None of it was overtly hostile. All of it was delivered with apparent concern for my well-being. But the cumulative effect was to create a narrative that I was struggling, overwhelmed, and increasingly dependent on Michelle to function. Meanwhile, she was positioning herself as the competent, reliable, strategic mind who was keeping everything running smoothly. I realized she wasn't trying to be a good executive assistant. She was trying to make me obsolete so she could take my job. And the truly brilliant, infuriating part? She was using access I'd given her to do it. Every confidential document I shared so she could prepare briefings. Every strategic conversation she attended so she could understand context. Every relationship I'd helped her build with other executives. She'd weaponized my mentorship. Most people would have fired her immediately. But I'm not most people. I'm a strategist. And I knew that firing Michelle without clear, documented cause would look like exactly what she'd been setting up, a struggling executive removing a competent assistant who'd been covering for her. So instead of firing her, I started building a case. I created a separate encrypted folder on my personal laptop. Not my work computer. Personal device, personal cloud storage, completely separate from Meridian systems. And I started documenting everything. Every email Michelle sent on my behalf. I'd BCC my personal email on anything sensitive. Every document she edited. I kept original versions with timestamps. Every meeting she scheduled or rescheduled. I logged it. Every conversation where she undermined me. I wrote it down immediately afterward with dates, times, witnesses present. I also started testing her. Deliberately sharing different information with her than what I shared with others. Giving her documents with subtle errors or unique phasing to see if those exact phrases would appear in her conversations with other executives. They did. Every time. She'd take confidential strategy documents I shared with her and within days, I'd hear my exact language coming out of her mouth in conversations with other leaders. She'd slightly rephrase things, but the core ideas were unmistakably mine. I documented all of it. I also discovered something else. Michelle had been accessing files she had no business opening. I found this out through our IT department. I'd asked them, casually, to run an audit of who'd been accessing certain confidential strategy documents stored on our shared drive. Michelle's name appeared repeatedly. Files I'd never asked her to open. Board presentations she had no reason to view. Confidential financial analyses that weren't part of her responsibilities. She'd been using her access privileges to read everything she could find. Building her own knowledge base from my confidential work. I documented that too. Got official IT logs. Timestamped. Comprehensive. By 6 months in, I had a file that was devastating. Over 200 pages of documentation showing systematic intellectual property theft, unauthorized access to confidential information, and a deliberate pattern of undermining my position while positioning herself as my replacement. But I still waited. Because I needed the perfect moment. That moment came in the form of our annual strategic planning cycle. Every year, Meridian's executive team spends 3 months developing our strategic plan for the next fiscal year. It's the most important work we do. The plan determines resource allocation, hiring priorities, client focus, everything. As CSO, I lead this process. It's literally my primary responsibility. Marcus asked me to develop the framework for this year's planning cycle. He wanted something innovative. Something that would differentiate Meridian in an increasingly competitive market. I spent 2 months building it. A comprehensive approach that integrated client needs analysis, competitive positioning, talent development, and financial modeling into a unified strategic framework. It was good. Probably the best strategic work I'd ever done. I shared the draft with Michelle because I needed her to coordinate the leadership meetings where we'd review and refine it. 2 weeks later, Marcus called a meeting. Said he wanted to discuss the strategic planning approach before we rolled it out to the full leadership team. I assumed he wanted to give me feedback. Maybe suggest adjustments. I walked into the conference room. Marcus was there. Our CFO, David. Our COO, Patricia. And Michelle. Marcus started the meeting. Thanks for joining on short notice. I wanted to discuss the strategic planning framework. Michelle brought me some concerns that I think we need to address. I looked at Michelle. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Marcus continued. Michelle's been doing some excellent thinking about our strategic approach. She's identified some gaps in the current framework and developed some modifications that I think are really strong. He pulled up a presentation. My framework. With Michelle's name on it. Modified slightly, but fundamentally my work. Michelle walked through the presentation like she developed it from scratch. Explained the methodology. Outlined the implementation approach. Answered questions from David and Patricia. She was presenting my work. In front of me. To my boss and peers. And Marcus was eating it up. Michelle, this is outstanding. Claire, why didn't you show me work at this level? I kept my voice level. Marcus, this is my work. I shared this framework with Michelle 2 weeks ago. She's presenting my strategic plan with minor modifications. Michelle looked hurt. Claire, I'm not trying to take credit for your ideas. I just thought I could help by building on your initial thinking and developing it into something more actionable. More actionable? Michelle, you literally copied my framework and changed the formatting. Marcus held up a hand. Let's not get territorial. The point is to develop the best strategy for Meridian. If you both contributed, that's fine. Michelle, why don't you take the lead on finalizing this and rolling it out to the leadership team? That's when I knew. Marcus wasn't oblivious. He was actively choosing Michelle's version of reality. Because having a young, ambitious Stanford MBA develop strategic frameworks looked better for him than giving me credit. I'd built the entire strategic foundation for this company. And I was watching my assistant steal it while my CEO applauded. Marcus, I need to be clear. That framework is my intellectual property. I developed it over 2 months. Michelle had no involvement in its creation. She's presenting my work without attribution. Michelle's eyes got wide. Claire, I'm really concerned about how you're reacting to collaboration. I thought we were a team. Patricia, the COO, chimed in. Claire, I think you're being a bit protective here. If Michelle helped refine your ideas, that's a good thing. I looked around the room. They'd already decided. Michelle was the strategic thinker. I was the territorial executive who couldn't handle collaboration. That was the setup. That was the narrative she'd been building for months. And in that moment, I made my decision. You're right, I said calmly. I apologize for being defensive. Michelle, why don't you continue with the presentation? She looked relieved. Kept presenting. Marcus nodded along, impressed. I took notes. Smiled pleasantly. Acted like everything was fine. After the meeting, I went back to my office. Closed the door. And I opened my encrypted documentation file. I spent 3 hours that evening creating a comprehensive report. Titled it simply, Documentation of Intellectual Property Theft and Confidential Information Misuse by Michelle Carter. The report had 6 sections. Section 1, Pattern of Idea Theft. Documented 12 separate instances where Michelle had presented my work as her own. Each instance included the original document I'd created, timestamp showing when I shared it with Michelle, and evidence of her subsequently presenting the same ideas to others. Section 2, Unauthorized Access to Confidential Files. IT logs showing Michelle had accessed 47 confidential files she had no authorization to view. Board presentations, financial analyses, client strategy documents, personnel information. Section 3, Systematic Undermining of Executive Leadership. Documentation of 18 separate conversations where Michelle had made statements to other executives questioning my competence, workload management, or strategic capability. Section 4, Misrepresentation of Roles and Responsibilities. Examples of Michelle representing herself as having strategic decision-making authority she didn't possess. Including emails where she claimed to be leading strategic initiatives that I was actually leading. Section 5, Breach of Confidentiality Agreements. Documentation that Michelle had shared confidential strategic information with external contacts, including a former McKinsey colleague who now worked at a competing firm. Section 6, Today's Meeting. A detailed account of Michelle presenting my strategic planning framework as her own work, including side-by-side comparison of my original framework and her presentation. I attached all supporting documentation. Emails, file logs, witness statements from colleagues I'd quietly interviewed, timestamped documents. Everything. The report was 73 pages. I exported it as a PDF. Encrypted it. And I scheduled a meeting for the following morning with 3 people, Marcus Livingston, CEO. Patricia Simmons, COO. And Robert Chen, our General Counsel. Subject line, Urgent Legal Matter, Confidential. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was nervous. Because I was angry. Angry that I'd spent 4 years proving myself in this role only to watch someone try to steal it through systematic deception. But I was also calm. Because I had documentation. And documentation doesn't lie. The meeting was scheduled for 8 a.m. I arrived at 7:45. Robert was already there, looking confused. Patricia arrived at 7:50. Marcus walked in at 8:02, coffee in hand, clearly annoyed about the early meeting. Claire, what's this about? I have a packed schedule today. This is about a legal issue that requires immediate attention. I've asked Robert to be here because I'm reporting serious misconduct by a member of my team. Robert sat up straighter. What kind of misconduct? Systematic intellectual property theft, unauthorized access to confidential files, and misappropriation of executive work product. By my executive assistant. Michelle Carter. Marcus frowned. Claire, if this is about yesterday's meeting, it's about 18 months of documented misconduct that culminated in yesterday's meeting. I have comprehensive evidence. I opened my laptop. Pulled up the report on the screen. I'm going to walk you through this systematically. Then Robert can advise on appropriate next steps. For the next 45 minutes, I presented my case. Every section. Every piece of evidence. I was methodical. Unemotional. Professional. Marcus's expression changed from annoyed to confused to concerned to alarmed. Patricia stopped me halfway through. Claire, some of these files Michelle accessed, those include board confidential information. If she shared any of that externally, Section 5 addresses that. She shared strategic information with a contact at Cornerstone Consulting, our primary competitor. I have email evidence. Robert was typing notes furiously. This is serious. If she was using her position to access confidential information and share it with competitors, that's not just an HR issue. That's potentially criminal. Marcus held up a hand. Wait. Before we escalate this, I need to understand. Claire, are you certain about this evidence? Because you're essentially accusing Michelle of corporate espionage. I'm not accusing, Marcus. I'm reporting. With documentation. You can verify every piece of evidence I've provided. The IT logs are official company records. The emails are in our system. The file access timestamps can be independently confirmed. But why would Michelle do this? Because she wants my job. And she's been systematically positioning herself to take it by making me look incompetent while demonstrating her own strategic capabilities. Using my work. Patricia leaned back in her chair. The strategic planning framework. That was actually your work? Completely. I can show you the development history. Every draft, every iteration, spanning 2 months. Michelle saw the final version 2 weeks ago when I asked her to schedule review meetings. Yesterday was the first time she presented it as her own. Robert closed his laptop. Marcus, Patricia, I need to be very clear. If even half of what Claire has documented is accurate, Meridian has significant legal exposure. An executive assistant with access to confidential files sharing information with competitors. Potential theft of intellectual property. Misrepresentation of work product. We need to investigate this immediately and thoroughly. Marcus looked genuinely shaken. I had no idea. Michelle seemed so competent. So trustworthy. She is competent, I said quietly. That's what made this effective. She's smart enough to steal strategically and present it convincingly. But that doesn't make it legal or ethical. What do you want to happen here, Claire? I want Michelle terminated immediately. I want a full IT forensic review of what files she accessed and whether any other confidential information was shared externally. And I want a formal company-wide communication making clear that any work product attributed to Michelle from my department was actually my work. Patricia nodded slowly. That's reasonable. Robert, what's the process? I'll initiate an immediate investigation. Michelle should be suspended pending review. Given the severity of the allegations and the documentation Claire's provided, I'd expect this investigation to conclude quickly. If the evidence holds up, termination is appropriate and necessary. Marcus looked at me. Claire, I owe you an apology. I should have paid more attention. I should have questioned what was happening. Yesterday's meeting, I was completely wrong. Yes, you were. And Marcus, you need to understand something. This happened because Michelle had access she shouldn't have had and because the leadership team was too willing to believe I was struggling rather than questioning why my assistant suddenly seemed so strategic. He nodded. Point taken. We'll address this. All of it. The investigation took 3 days. Robert worked with our IT team to pull comprehensive access logs. He interviewed other executives about their interactions with Michelle. He reviewed every document I'd provided. On day 2, he found something I hadn't known about. Michelle had been using her email access to my calendar and contacts to reach out to potential clients, presenting herself as a senior strategist at Meridian. She'd been building her own client pipeline using company resources and my reputation. On day 3, Robert called me to his office. "Claire, I've completed the preliminary investigation. The evidence is overwhelming. Michelle accessed confidential files without authorization on 73 separate occasions. She shared strategic information with external contacts at least 5 times, including with competitors. She misrepresented her role and responsibilities to clients and other executives. And she systematically presented your work as her own. What happens now?" "She's terminated. Effective immediately. Security is removing her from the building as we speak. We're also sending a cease and desist letter regarding any confidential information she may have retained and notifying the clients she contacted without authorization." "Is she going to face legal consequences?" "That depends. If we find evidence of actual harm to Meridian from her information sharing, we'll pursue civil action. The criminal question is more complex. Corporate espionage is difficult to prove unless there was clear financial benefit to her or the competitors. I don't need her prosecuted, Robert. I just needed her stopped." He looked at me with something like respect. "Claire, the documentation you provided was some of the most thorough evidence I've seen in an internal investigation. Most people would have just complained or tried to fire her quietly. You built an airtight case. I'm a strategist. Building cases is what I do." That afternoon, Marcus called an emergency executive team meeting. Michelle was gone. Her desk was cleared. Her access was revoked. Marcus addressed the team directly. "I need to inform you that Michelle Carter's employment has been terminated effective immediately following an investigation into serious misconduct. The details are confidential, but I want to be clear, any strategic work you've heard attributed to Michelle from Claire's department was actually Claire's work. Michelle misrepresented her contributions and her role." There was silence. Uncomfortable shifting. Marcus continued. "I also want to apologize to Claire publicly. I didn't pay enough attention. I allowed a problematic situation to escalate. That's on me as CEO. It won't happen again." Patricia added, "Going forward, we're implementing new protocols around executive assistant access to confidential files. And we're going to be more careful about attribution of work product. What happened here shouldn't have been possible." After the meeting, several executives approached me privately. Apologizing. Saying they hadn't realized what was happening. That they should have questioned Michelle's sudden strategic insights. I accepted their apologies. But I didn't forget who had believed her so readily. 2 weeks later, I was in a strategy review meeting with Marcus. Just the two of us. He wanted to discuss the strategic planning framework, the one Michelle had tried to steal. "Claire, I've read through your original framework thoroughly. It's exceptional. We're going to implement it exactly as you designed it." "Thank you. I also want to talk about what happens next for you. You've made it clear that you're not just competent, you're essential. Our strategic direction literally depends on your work. I want to make sure you're planning to stay." "I'm considering my options." He nodded. "Fair. What would make you want to stay?" "Equity. I want skin in the game. I want ownership stake in the company I'm building strategy for." "What percentage?" 3% vested over 4 years. Most executives would have negotiated. Marcus just nodded. "Done. I'll have the paperwork drawn up." "Anything else?" "A formal title change. Chief Strategy Officer doesn't capture the scope anymore. I want Chief Strategy and Operations Officer. Real authority over implementation, not just planning." Also done. "Claire, I learned something from this situation. I learned that I've been taking your work for granted. Assuming it would always be there. I won't make that mistake again. See that you don't." 3 months later, I hired a new executive assistant. Her name was Jennifer. Mid-career professional. No executive ambitions. Just wanted to be excellent at supporting leadership. During her interview, I was very clear. I need someone who understands that their role is support, not strategy. Someone who can handle confidential information with absolute integrity. Someone who has no interest in taking credit for work they didn't do. Jennifer laughed. I've heard about your last assistant. Word travels. I'm looking for a stable role with clear boundaries. I have no interest in corporate drama or playing political games. Then you'll fit perfectly. She's still with me. Does exceptional work. Maintains clear professional boundaries. And most importantly, understands that her success comes from making me successful, not from replacing me. I saw Michelle once more, about 6 months after her termination. She was at a coffee shop near our office. I almost didn't recognize her. She looked smaller. Diminished. She saw me. Looked away quickly. Then seemed to gather courage and approached my table. Claire. Hi. Michelle. I wanted to say. I'm sorry. For what I did. I was ambitious and stupid and I convinced myself I was just being strategic. I wasn't. I was stealing your work and I'm sorry. I studied her. Trying to assess if the apology was genuine or just another manipulation. What are you doing now? I asked. Consulting. Independent. It's not going great. Turns out when you can't use someone else's work, you have to actually develop your own ideas. I'm not as good at that as I thought. No, you're not. She flinched. You have every right to be angry. I'm not angry anymore, Michelle. I was angry for a while. Then I was just disappointed. You had real potential. You could have built a legitimate career. Instead, you tried to shortcut by stealing mine. That was a choice. And choices have consequences. I know. I lost the job. I lost my reputation in the industry. Word got around about why I was fired. No one will hire me for anything senior now. Good. That's supposed to happen when you steal intellectual property and share confidential information with competitors. She looked at the floor. I know. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. For whatever that's worth. It's worth acknowledgement. But it doesn't change what you did. She nodded. Turned to leave. Then paused. For what it's worth, Claire, you're brilliant. I knew that. That's why I tried to take credit for your work. I couldn't match it, so I tried to steal it. That was wrong. I hope you're still doing great things. I am. Without you. She left. I watched her go. And I felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not vindication. Just the quiet confirmation that I'd been right to document everything and stop her when I did. Today, I'm still Chief Strategy and Operations Officer at Meridian Dynamics. The company's grown to $90 million in revenue. I own 3% of it. My strategic frameworks are implemented across the organization. And I built all of it without anyone stealing credit. Because I learned something from Michelle. I learned that being talented isn't enough. You have to protect your work. You have to document your contributions. You have to build evidence before you need it. And when someone tries to steal what you've built, you have to be willing to destroy their career with documentation so thorough they can't deny it. My name is Claire Donovan. My executive assistant spent 18 months stealing my work and undermining my credibility. So I documented everything, built an airtight legal case, and handed it to our general counsel in a 73-page report that ended her career in 3 days. Thanks for watching, corporate survivors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my former assistant, then you're probably still trying to build a legitimate career without access to other people's work. Good luck with that learning curve.